In the freezing winter of 1939, a tank rolls out of the tree line. The silhouette is unmistakable to any student of armor. The boxy hull, the offset turret, the sputtering roar of a Russian-made air-cooled engine. It is a Soviet T-26, but on its turret, painted in rough whitewash over the Soviet 4BO green, is the blue Hakkaristi. This is the great paradox of the Northern Front. For the vast majority of World War II, the primary supplier of tanks to the Finnish army was the Red Army. Finland entered the war with almost no domestic tank industry to speak of. Yet by the onset of the Continuation War in 1941, they fielded a hardened armored division capable of stopping a superpower. They didn't do it with Lend-Lease, and they didn't do it with factories. They did it by stealing the enemy's steel. From the ubiquitous T-26 workhorses to the bizarre Pikku Sotka and the legendary tank-killing Sturmi, this is the complete history of every armored vehicle fielded by Finland in World War II. The Light Tank Legion. To understand the miracle of the Finnish Armored Corps, we must start with the light tanks. This was the most numerous class in Finnish service, and at the outbreak of the Winter War, the situation was dire. First, the Renault FT-17. Finland had purchased 32 of these French relics in 1919. By 1939, they were hopelessly obsolete. With a top speed of barely 7 kilometers per hour and weaponry that couldn't scratch modern armor, the Finns wisely decided not to use them for maneuver warfare. Instead, they were dug into the frozen earth of the Mannerheim line, serving as static steel pillboxes. They were no longer tanks, they were desperate fortifications. The intended replacement was the British Vickers 6-ton, or Mark E. In theory, this was a modern platform, but due to severe budget constraints, Finland bought them without guns, optics, or radios. When the Soviet tanks crossed the border, many Vickers were still being frantically fitted with 37mm Bofors guns. In their disastrous debut at the Battle of Honkaniemi, the mechanical unreliability and lack of coordination saw them decimated. But from the wreckage of the Winter War, a hybrid was born. The T-26E. This is a favorite among modelers for its unique look. Finnish mechanics took the hulls of salvaged British Vickers and mated them with captured Soviet turrets housing the 45mm 20K gun. The E stood for Englanti, English. It was the perfect symbol of Finnish pragmatism. British hull, Soviet gun, Finnish fighting spirit. But the true backbone of the Finnish armor wasn't the Vickers, it was the war booty, the Soviet T-26. Finland captured and refurbished so many that they effectively standardized their army on the enemy's equipment. They operated so many variants that the Finnish army developed its own classification system that you need to know. The T-26A. This designation covered the early twin-turreted models, armed mostly with machine guns. The T-26B, the model 1933, featuring the single cylindrical turret and the 45mm 20K gun. The T-26C, the model 1938 and 1939, easily identified by the sloped armor of the conical turret.
The Finns didn't just repaint them, they improved them. They stripped out the flamethrowers from captured OT-130s, OT-133s, and OT-26s, converting them into standard gun tanks to maximize anti-tank capability. They improved the ventilation and the optics. In the hands of Finnish crews, the T-26 went from a mass assault fodder vehicle to a precision instrument of ambush. Speed was provided by the Soviet BT series, the Bystrochodny tanks. Finland operated the BT-5 and the BT-7, models 1935 and 1937. Known for their Christie suspension, these tanks were exceptionally fast but cursed with paper-thin armor. The Finns found them unsuitable for the grinding forest warfare of Karelia, but kept them for specialized task forces. Interestingly, while the Soviets often ran them on wheels on roads, the Finns almost exclusively kept the tracks on to navigate the snow and mud. Then there were the rarities, the unicorns of the Finnish inventory. The T-50. This was a highly advanced Soviet light tank intended to replace the T-26. It had excellent sloped armor and a diesel engine. Production problems in the USSR meant very few were made, and Finland captured only one. They nicknamed it Pikku Sotka, or Little Sotka. It was up-armored by Finnish engineers and served as a command tank until the very end of the war, a testament to its build quality. Other light armor filled the reconnaissance gaps. The amphibious T-37A and T-38. These swimming tanks were essentially lightly armored coffins, armed only with a machine gun. They were used strictly for scouting. And finally, the T-60 and T-70. Captured in small numbers, the Finns were unimpressed. The T-60's 20mm cannon was weak, and the T-70's one-man turret was a tactical nightmare. Most were relegated to training schools or used to haul supplies when trucks couldn't handle the snow.
Medium and heavy armor. As the war dragged on, armor thickness increased. Finland had to adapt, moving from light raiders to medium brawlers. Enter the T-28, a Soviet multi-turreted land battleship. The Red Army deemed them obsolete and abandoned them in droves during the Winter War. The Finns, however, saw potential. They nicknamed them postijuna, the mail train, because of their massive length and tendency to attract attention. Finnish workshops created the T-28E variant. They bolted additional armor plating to the front, bringing protection up to 50 millimeters. While large targets, their 76mm guns provided excellent fire support against infantry bunkers. But the geopolitical landscape shifted in 1941 with the arrival of the legendary T-34. Finland operated the T-34-76, specifically the models 1941 through 1943. The Finns called it the Sotka. The story goes that a tank crewman thought the T-34's side profile looked like a golden-eyed duck, a Sotka. These were the crown jewels of the captured fleet. For the first time, Finnish crews had a tank that combined mobility, firepower, and sloped armor protection. Later in the war, they acquired a handful of the upgunned T-34-85s, some captured from the Soviets, others bought from captured German stocks. These 85mm guns gave Finland a fighting chance against the new Stalin tanks. Speaking of German stocks, we must mention the Panzer IV. In 1944, desperate for modern equipment, Finland purchased 15 Panzer IV Aus V tanks from Germany. They arrived too late to stop the massive Soviet summer offensive, but they did see combat in the Lapland War, ironically fighting against the Germans who had just sold them. In the assault gun and self-propelled artillery class, we find the most famous and perhaps the most tragic vehicles of the Finnish war effort. First, the indigenous BT-42. This is a vehicle that has achieved cult status today, but its reality was harsh. Finnish engineers took captured BT-7 hulls and constructed a massive new turret to house a British 4.5-inch howitzer from 1918. It looked impressive, it moved fast, but as an anti-tank weapon, it was a failure. The fusing on its HET shells was defective, and at the Battle of Vyborg in 1944, BT-42 crews watched in horror as their shells bounced harmlessly off the hulls of T-34s and KV-1s. If the BT-42 was the failure, the StuG III Aus G was the savior. Nicknamed Sturmi, 59 of these were purchased from Germany in 1943 and 1944. This was the weapon Finland had been waiting for. Low profile, good frontal armor, and the potent 75mm StuG 40 gun. Finnish crews modified them further. You can spot a Finnish StuG by the concrete logs placed over the driver's visor and wooden logs draped along the sides to detonate hollow charge rounds. The result was devastating.
The Sturmi battalions are credited with destroying 87 enemy tanks for the loss of only 8 vehicles. It was the most cost-effective armored asset Finland possessed. Finally, a rare heavy hitter, the ISU-152. Finland captured 2 of these massive Soviet beast killers. One was pressed into combat service, wielding its 152mm howitzer against its former owners. The other was converted into a recovery vehicle, the ISU-152V, tasked with towing the heaviest broken-down tanks off the line. Armored cars, AA, and prototypes. The vast forests of Karelia required constant reconnaissance, a role filled by a motley collection of armored cars. Pre-war, Finland used the Swedish Landsverk 182, but as with the tanks, the bulk of the fleet was Soviet-made. The BA-10 and BA-10M were the most numerous, acting as reliable heavy scouts. They were supported by the lighter BA-20, heavy BA-3 and BA-6 models, and even antique FAI cars. The Finns valued these for road patrols, freeing up tracked vehicles for off-road combat. For air defense, Finland looked again to Sweden, purchasing 6 Landsverk Little L-62 Anti-2 tanks. These were open-topped vehicles mounting a single 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft cannon. While designed to shoot down planes, Finnish crews quickly discovered that a rapid-fire 40mm cannon was absolutely terrifying against Soviet infantry columns. We conclude with the prototypes and rarities, the desperate experiments of a nation under siege. The BT-43, an attempt to build an armored personnel carrier on a captured BT-7 hull. Only one prototype was ever built before the project was scrapped. And the Vickers Carden Lloyd 1933, a tiny light patrol tank bought for testing in the 30s. Too weak for combat, it spent the entire war training the next generation of tank crews. When the armistice was finally signed in September 1944, the Finnish Armored Division was a logistical nightmare, a mechanic's headache, but it was also a fighting miracle. They had British tanks fitted with Soviet guns, Soviet tanks manned by Finnish crews, and German assault guns fighting for a democracy caught between 2 totalitarian superpowers. Finland proved that in war, armor thickness matters, but resourcefulness matters more. They didn't have the industrial might to build an army, so they built one from the scraps of their enemies. And with that stolen steel, they kept their independence. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Finnish armor, check out our video on the Simo Häyhä myth versus reality. Don't forget to like and subscribe.